Hello, and welcome to Health Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we dive into the Health and Fitness. We're learning to overcome adversity, to pick back for its fiction, and see health and fitness in a whole new light. Today, guys, we're going to talk about what you can do day to day to keep yourself healthy, track your heart rate, and have an understanding of what am I looking at. Even us as trainers sometimes get confused of what all those metrics mean on wearables. I can't tell you enough. You stare and go, what is that? What is that? Or even a silly example is like a clients, we use blood oxygen. We put it on and they go, oh, my heart rate's 98 beats per minute. It's like, no, that's your blood oxygen saturation. Like, what does that mean? So just little things like that are important to know and understand about what you're looking at. So we got the perfect guest for you today. So without further ado, let's welcome to the show, Greg Elliot. Greg, it's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you, Anthony, so much. This is super exciting. I love, obviously, what you've been doing and pushing out some of the stuff. The guests you've had on have been phenomenal. So I'm honored to be a part of that list.
I appreciate it. Try to do our best to get all the information out that is possible to everybody. So, Greg, I just want you to tell us a little bit. I know we were talking backstage, and I'm just gonna spoil it. Another DO, as you guys could tell, and from listening to the show, we love DOs here. So, why did you become a doctor, and what kind of got you into this field altogether?
Yeah. Again, thanks for having me. This is great. And you know, the osteopathy profession in Canada is quite small. And so it's rare that there's a lot of, understanding around what that is up here. So it's growing. But what got me interested in this field is I grew up as a student athlete. So I played university basketball down in Pennsylvania. I was down there. So I was always interested in health and well-being and saw the power of exercise. So I stayed it after my degree and my bachelor's degree and stayed to do my master's in exercise phys. Came back and started to realize that, exercise is great, but I wanted a little more, a bigger tool set into what's going on. So in 2015, started the osteopathy program in Vancouver, Canada. Graduated in 21. And luckily, because of my prior profession, I was able to kind of continue on and apply some of the skills as I was going to osteopathy school. And so I was kind of still in the clinic over those years, helping people. Primarily, I work with the chronic pain or as I kind of call it, the invisible illnesses, the fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, people with depression, anxiety, PTSD, working with those type of populations. And where I kind of fit my skill set in regards to other osteopaths or other kind of professionals is I really, incorporate that exercise component into what's going on a little bit more and kind of meld some of the osteopathy and exercise to get people back moving.
And that's rare. I just kind of want to point that out. We don't get a lot of doctors that push the exercise component. And I'm like, we're going to throw another one on top of it. I think it might be I don't want to say I think. I know it's because doctors are always thinking about malpractice. And that's, end of the day, you don't want to be sued because you are the most sued profession, period. So yeah. We have a lot of doctors that will have clients that injure themselves like on their own, and then they say, don't work out. But like that's the last thing you want to do is not work out. Or just as a silly example again, is you have somebody who maybe sprains their rotator cuff and the doctor goes, no exercise for 4 weeks. Well, what about their core? What about their legs? Like there's other stuff we could do, but our clients take it so seriously about what they say, they stop. And then guess what always happens? They never come back because they lose all that motivation of getting to the gym in the first place.
Totally. And the two biggest things you said from that aspect that we know that are completely false is one, the fact that immobility after injury is one of the worst things, right? We got to continue to be motion, even if they can move an inch with their shoulder, right? We got to continue to utilize that inch and be comfortable and continue to grow with it. When it comes to the understanding of pain and what the problem is, there's certain motions that may be a little bit of discomfort, but okay for them to be able to move. We just got to be able to educate on that aspect of it all. And I think too, one of the things that a lot of medical professionals do is we have this language that people aren't as feel very frail or don't feel that they're not as strong as they think and they can't do it because they if they move it think something's going to rupture or break and things like that. The body is absolutely completely one of the most resilient things on this earth, and so we got to be able to push a little bit, and it's okay to be able to do that. And so the mentality of people of the doctor says, don't move. I can't move anything. If I do anything, it's going to be, it's going to get worse. It's going to get this. And they have that, even the mentality aspect of rehabilitation is a huge component, I think, is undervalued as well.
I'm going to ask you this question, which I wasn't going to, but now I'm going to. It's more of a theory I have, and I'm asking a couple guests. And if you listen to the show, you probably already know what the question is. But I want to know people's honest opinions. And this is a theory. This isn't proven in science. But anyway, my theory is that over thousands of years, we walked. That's all we did. We constantly moved. And if we didn't move, we died from the elements. We separated from our packs, we'll say, and we would end up just dying off from a million different things. So our bodies had to learn how to adapt while in motion. So when we were sick, when we injured ourselves, we had to learn how to heal those while moving. And this is why I've always said the worst thing we can do, no matter what we have, is be immobile, because our bodies are used to healing themselves while moving. Our bodies are used to healing themselves while sick. And that's one of the biggest reasons I push, maybe don't go lift 400 pounds while you're whatever, but you can walk. You can walk down your block. You can walk to your mailbox. Little things like that we've been programmed over thousands of years to do, which is why it's important to keep moving no matter what you have or what is going on.
No, completely. And many different reasons, not just necessarily injury, prevention or recovery, but many different things. You talk about movement, and there's pieces of that, what you're saying, of evidence that's out there that's absolutely supportive of what you're saying, right? One of the biggest studies that came out, I think it was about 5 or 7 years ago, that looked at, I think it was the mummies that what they looked at, but they looked at a lot of different people from all sorts of backgrounds and looked at some of their joints and kinematics, and what they found based on the evidence that was presented in front of them, that people that developed arthritis or these type of like bone issues or whatever it may be, it's not the fact that it was too much motion, it was lack of motion that was more susceptible to development of these type of conditions. So there's pieces of evidence out there that absolutely support what your mind has been put together on its own.
I appreciate that. I tell people all the time when they look at me and they roll their eyes. Like when I have a virus, I'm not laying in bed because I know, hey, you lay in bed, if you have something like this COVID, for an example, I'm going to develop pneumonia. So I need to move. So I go for walks, and I attribute that to getting over the sickness quicker than most people.
Oh, completely. No, and that's you talk about. There's pieces of all the stuff that's out there that looks into why there's benefit. I remember I had a teammate. I played in Montreal for a couple of years before I went to the States afterwards. But I had a teammate that anytime he got sick, I just see him. I walk by the gym and him just sprinting with a complete sweat on a treadmill, right? Just absolute. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm burning it off." And I like. And you look at some of the physiology, you kind of look at understanding of like, okay, well, what is the body trying to do? It's trying to increase inflammation. So you try to like support the inflammation levels to be able to recover faster. So theoretically, it goes there. I haven't dived too much into the literature about, what that actually translates into clinical outcomes. But absolutely, like when you start to break down the physiology, you can understand how doing something like that, to continue to moving when you have, or even more movement when you actually have, a sickness or an illness. It can make sense for sure.
I love it. And this kind of ties into kind of what we wanted to talk about today anyway, which is understanding your body. A lot of people don't understand the metrics they're looking at, and maybe there's just too many. A lot of people don't really learn it in school past what's heart rate. Like that's it. So what are some different ways or different types of wearables you can use to help track different metrics, and what does it all mean?
Yeah, so it's when you look at activity trackers and wearables, I mean, it's exploding in regards to the companies that are out there that are, at the forefront of this type of technology. And it's, from the US population, 40% of individuals have some sort of activity or fitness tracker, right? So it's the adoptability is there. And we know one of the limitations of these is people get this information and they don't know what to do with them, right? And one of the examples I always bring up is, hey, if you have a wearable, great. It says your REM sleep is low. Awesome. What do you do with that information? Right? Like, how do you actually impact it? And this is the complexity, is to the point when you start to look up like how to improve REM sleep. It's like 50,000 different things you can possibly do, because it's truly one of those things that covers all areas of life. Like, to improve REM sleep, it could be your sleep hygiene. It could be due to your nutrition. It could be to the lack or too much of exercise. It can be in regards to stress management. It could, I mean, there's so many aspects of health that REM sleep has been impacted by. So then, okay, like, well, there's no actionability from that, because it could literally be anything. And so that's kind of, people get these fitness trackers and they see steps, they see sleep, and they kind of like, oh, cool, I get to track these things. But then they abandon it within, 30 days to a couple months, because they're kind of like, well, I don't know, is this good, is this bad? I don't necessarily know this is actually, I don't know how to do this information to improve my health and well-being. So that's kind of, been a big limitation. And so there's been a big push around companies now to, like Whoop or Oura Ring, or kind of Garmin, to say, hey, like based on the data, maybe we can suggest some things to be able to do in specific areas. But to really understand how to impact the information from the wearable product, there's so much more information that needs to be provided. But a lot of these companies are having difficulty in doing that, because from user experience standpoint, the more questions you get asked, the less likely that you're going to abandon, or the more likely you're going to abandon using that wearable product. Like, imagine every morning, okay, how's your energy levels? Okay, how's your sleep? How's your stress yesterday? Like, what did you eat? Like, all these type of things. It's like, if you get asked it every single day, you're even I don't want to do that, right? And I track a lot of stuff. I can imagine the regular consumer. So yeah, there's tons of information out there from the wearable, but there are a few ones in particular that are extremely valuable. And one that I've been utilizing for the last decade in regards to clinical experience was something called heart rate variability, which is a little bit different than heart rate. But I don't know if we want to dive into that right now. But that's kind of the wearable product. There's many different numbers out there, but there's some that are absolutely more impactful than others.
Yeah, I have a few questions just overall about wearables. And I'll start with the different one, kind of not what you're expecting. But I know a lot of people, especially when it comes to step counts, and myself included, you start obsessing. And it's one side of it, it's actually not healthy to sit there and be like, oh my God, I didn't hit my steps. And you just start freaking out and stressing about it. And you just constantly looking to make sure you get it. I don't wear a watch anymore. I used to wear a wearable watch. I walk enough. I can't sit here and worry about not getting my 15,000 steps. If I get 14,000 one day, like, it's not going to change anything. So
No,
what do you do
absolutely.
about that side of it, where people are just doing too much and tracking too much?
Oh yeah, you see that with a lot of people, and they completely obsessive. Every single number. I don't know if you've been following Brian Johnson at all. Uh, the what do you call it? It's the blueprint, he calls it. So he's a wealthy individual that's spending about $2 million a year trying to do everything he possibly can to have all of his metrics as an 18-year-old to be as young as possible. He's trying to reverse the aging process. He calls himself the most measured man on the face of the earth, right? And he's got a team of people. Everything is measured, or this or that, and obviously that's super extreme. He's been doing it for about 2 years now. He's based out of in the LA area, but that's the extreme side of things, where everything's calculated, every micronutrient, macronutrient, every medication. This is like routine. Everything is kind of extremely structured in that standpoint. Right, and that's obviously the extreme. And then there's other people that are just kind of like, go how my body feels. Like, I don't want any numbers. I want to go and more interoceptive, or have a great mind body connection, things like that. And I see the value of both of those things. I definitely see the value of taking breaks from wearable products. Sometimes my team calls me the human cyborg. I wear 4 different wearables at a time, just to look at different data points and all that type of stuff. I don't do it for long. I don't do it for more than like a week or so for various things. But I do absolutely take breaks from this type of stuff to just go live life, right? It's completely necessary. I do this all the time. I do it with coffee. I do it with exercising. I do it with all these type of things where you take these kind of micro breaks to disconnect, right? And to be able to kind of just live life the way, in a different way, and have a different view about things. I did that a couple months ago when I was went to Thailand with some friends for kind of a boys trip, and I just like, I'm not taking any wearables. I'm going to go have fun, just live life, do what I need to be able to do. I also wore wearables during a trip to Ireland, which was quite shocking to see what a few pints of Guinness can absolutely do some of your health metrics.
I'm laughing because I
But
was just there last week.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So you know how the Guinness flows out there, and so you start to see the impact of that. So yeah, and to me, it's like it's all about when we use these wearables at a specific time, right? You're on it for a specific reason, and then it gives you feedback, it gives you awareness, and I think that's the key is awareing to the point of like you need to aware what it feels like when you do a 10,000 step day versus a 4,000 step day, like just so you kind of like I understand what that actually means, and then I want to be, aspire to be more that 10,000 step day. Just have those reference points of what's going on, and to me, that's a huge step in the right direction.
And there's a great flip side of it, which is what my next point was anyway, was I like my mom, for an example, I hate to pick on her, but she finally got a smartwatch and she was like, look how much I walked. And it was like 3,500 steps. I was like, Mom, that's nowhere near where you should be.
Totally.
She's like, I thought that was good because the watch set her down to only 5,000 steps a day. So in her mind, she was 60% there. And she's like, look, I'm 60% towards what a goal for an individual would be. I was like, you clearly didn't listen to my step episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, it's supposed to be triple 5,000. So you're 15,000, meaning you're nowhere near, but I love you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But again, like you said, the key is about that awareness piece. So people understand it's like, oh, and they have an idea of what is the what is 10,000 steps? What is 8,000 steps? What is 15,000 steps that relatively look like? What does a good week of sleep feel like and look like versus a bad week of sleep? What do I know can impact, and how much of it can impact when I have a drink or two, I have a coffee too late, or I eat right before bed, and all these type of things that we know can impact sleep. And sometimes it's like, oh, I don't actually know that impact of what's going on. It revolutionized me where I started looking at my numbers, and I have 2 young kids, and sometimes you got to feed them, you got to do this type of stuff. You get home late, and then you literally scarf down food before you go to sleep, and you start to see of like your body's digesting, like your heart rate stays high, your heart rate variability stays low for a few hours at a time, and then your body starts to recover. So I start to realize like, okay, well, I may be hungry at that specific time, and I may overstuff myself and things like that, but I see the negative impacts of that. So like, have a lighter meal if that comes up again. I know. So again, it just frames my understanding of those type of things. I don't necessarily have to measure to know that that's the right behavior now for me, because I'm now aware of that impact that it has.
Yeah, and that was going to kind of lead into what you wanted to talk about anyway. But how do you know what measurements to track? And then on top of that, how do you know the accuracy of these things? Because I could take my phone, have it in my pocket, and then do a different day with just the watch, and I get not only are they different, they're off by thousands of steps. So, and that's just one metric. So, how do you know all the other metrics are off? Like, how can you tell, and what do you look for?
Yeah, great question. So, people are always interested in how accurate things are, right? And to me, what you want to make sure of is there's obviously reliability and there's validity, right? So when you talk about validity aspects of these wearable devices, it's going to take a very long time, if ever, to be able to get there to be as gold, relative to the gold standard. But it can be relevant to you, right? I guarantee you, if you have your kind of phone in your pocket, if you do it says you're doing 2,000 steps, and then next day you did 4,000 steps, I guarantee you probably did more steps. Right. So it definitely went up in regards to that standpoint. So that's where I see some of the benefit. It's more about the reliability and individuality between you. Now, some companies obviously are trying to be able to achieve perfection as much as they can with some of their data points. I'll mention a couple of companies down, but a lot of them now are producing their own research and publishing it through peer-reviewed journal articles, showing them against the gold standard metrics of various things in various situations. They're trying to be able to go out there and showing that they're trying to be as accurate as possible. So I like those companies. But then there's other companies that hide behind algorithms and scores and this and that, and don't necessarily show the data, so you don't really necessarily know how accurate those things are, which is intriguing. Now you look at kind of the metrics that are out there. I kind of put them into different buckets, right? So the 3 different buckets that typically these smartwatches or wearables have. One is what we call the biometrics, right? So this is your heart rate variability, respiration rate, oxygen saturation, body temperature. So these are your biometrics. So we have a whole suite of information about biometrics. Then we have your sleep characteristics. Right, this is going to be your REM sleep, your deep sleep, how long you slept, when you woke up, all that type of stuff, right? So it has your sleep metrics, and then it has your activity metrics, where it can be steps, it can be GPS, it can be planning and putting in your workouts and all type of stuff. So you have those different buckets into what's going on, and I'll kind of highlight each of those. From activity trackers, I think it's pretty well established as to what's important, right? And to that standpoint, we have these stats and working out, and they're all relevant to a degree, right? In regards to accuracy, they can fluctuate quite significantly, but we know some of the important values that come from that. And that tells me that if you're interested in the exercise portion of it all, it's like, hey, then these metrics are important at that time. If that's your focus, your goal is like, hey, I want to be physically fit, those become your primary metrics into what's going on. The sleep metrics are ones that everyone's always interested in looking at, right? Because then no one really knows of other quality of sleep, and then they get these things like, oh my gosh, I only slept this long, or look at my deep sleep and light sleep, I woke up 5 times, all this type of stuff. And we know, if you have looked at the literature around these wearable products and sleep metrics, they are terrible. They are very bad at looking at the different sleep stages and waking up. And even clinically, when I have people that have, chronic pain or chronic conditions that have poor sleep quality, they don't like to look at the sleep metrics because they're like, well, I was up from 1 to 3, but it says I was sleeping, or vice versa, that I didn't wake up and it said I was up. And so they lose because it's that clinical population. It gets a little fishy with those people. And then the last bucket to me, and this is kind of the big bucket, is your biometrics. These kind of look at, to me, the kind of overall, picture of you and your health and well-being. A lot that can be derived from a holistic nature from that. There are ones that can be important for various conditions. SpO2 can be good for various things, which is the oxygen, how much oxygen you have in your blood. It can look at, with people have sleep apnea or any type of circulatory conditions, that could be of value. There's respiratory conditions, people that are dealing with COPD, or, start to look at environmental factors to what's going on. That can be quite good. To me, obviously, the ones that are the most important from a holistic biomarker is going to be heart rate and heart rate variability. The difference between the two is I love heart rate variability, but it's a much harder metric to calculate and to look at. The difference between is how I explain it. Is heart rate, everyone knows. 60 beats per minute, 90 beats per minute, all that type of stuff, which is, we know. We know lower is better in a typical standpoint. We want to, if you're at 60, you want to be at 50. Lower seems to be a healthier range overall, but it's really hard to kind of make those changes. Heart rate variability is different. What it looks at the frequency of which your beats occur. So Anthony, you and I say have 60 beats per minute as our resting heart rate. So what does that mean? Our heart beats 60 times in a minute if it's captured, right? It's the average between the two. My heart rate, though, beats consistent. It's like a metronome. It beats almost on the second, every single second, super consistent. Your heart rate at rest, so we say this is at rest, we're just resting and do that. Your heart rate goes up to 70, down to 50, up to 70, down to 50, and it's kind of, highly variable over that time frame, right? But we average over that minute 60 beats. Research shows, an incredible amount of research shows, that you're in a healthier, happier state than I am, which is counterintuitive to what a lot of people think, right? The opposite is true in this sense, because people think, oh, well, homeostasis, we want a stable environment, but it's actually not the case. When our heart rate is very significantly, our body's in a rest and digest parasympathetic state. When our heart rate variability is very consistent, we're in a stress state. We're sympathetically driven, right? We're in a fight or flight state at that specific point.
Can you just describe the difference between parasympathetic and sympathetic? Because I don't think a lot of people know the difference.
Absolutely. So sympathetic is your stress response. So and then this historically is when everyone says like, oh, there's a line behind you, you have to run and go out and do those things. I'm exercising, any type of things that provides you any type of physical or emotional stress, right? Going through trying to do a presentation or a podcast like this, anything with regards to, you get a bill and you're, have this big bill you got to pay. You don't know how you're going to pay it. That increases heart, all these type of things. So these are stressors. This is your sympathetic system. What it does is it mobilizes energy for you to be able to create, a better, quicker cognitive decision-making. It allows you to mobilize energy so you can use it for fuel. So it's in the presence of a stress, because historically we have to run away from a line. We have to run away from something. Your parasympathetic is your rest and digest. This is the recovery part of it. This is your ability to be able to recover, repair, regenerate, and be in a nice calm state. Now, historically, we always had a nice balance between these, because there's not a lot of things that we have now that provide a lot of stress, like commuting, like, having to go to, jobs or see social media that these people are successful, or, all these bills and all these things and the war over here and all that type of stuff. We're bombarded by a lot of stressors and a lot of sympathetic innervation. So What our problem is, and the very predominant saying in the exercise physiology field is, you can never overtrain, you can just under recover. So we have so much training or so much stress in our life now that our body doesn't get a chance to recover. And so this is what heart rate variability measures, is our ability to get in a parasympathetic, our ability to get into a rest and digest state to be able to recover from all the stress that's out there. That is absolutely key into our health and well-being, and seems to be a significant impactor to our physical health, our emotional health, and our social health as well.
That's a great long response. But no, it's appreciated because it shows that you know what you're talking about when you're able to really dive in. And I mean, I know what you're talking about, right? But even just that simple example of parasympathetic and sympathetic state to a lot of people is they have no idea. If I wouldn't have asked a client what they are, they're going to look at me and blink. So just having that understanding of what you're talking about, letting your body recover, is so important. And that's why it's one of the biggest stressors we do on the show. Sleep quality, making sure you're going to bed at the same time. And we've talked about consistency of sleep. We've talked about meditation, the importance of not your yoga on top of a mountain, Buddha style meditation, but more, just take a deep breath once in a while. Little things like that are so beneficial to us as people, and are going to help us so much more. And even with our tracking our heart rate variability, is what you're saying, is having the heart rate kind of flow instead of straight across or straight up.
Oh, totally. And like honestly, when you talk about some of these things, it's like, you're so true. I think we can get into the nuances of things. I mean, especially with nutrition. Nutrition is the most nuanced, I think area of health that's out there. In regards to what's going on, we have very little understanding of that aspect of it all, comparatively to what we know from an exercise perspective and sleep, and to a degree, in all those other areas. But it's I'm completely with you in that standpoint, that we have to look at things that be able to promote recovery, and it's so simple. I looked at the study recently that took a sample of a vast majority of the population. I think it was like 33,000 people. They did surveys, and they looked at, to a degree, that and they tracked some gold standard metrics. They looked at DEXA scans for body composition. People wore activity trackers. They did blood markers to determine if they're actually smoking or not. Like, not to the point of asking you're smoking, like they actually took their blood to determine these things. And they looked at some of the fundamental things that we know to be healthy, right? We looked at, do they have a relatively healthy, balanced diet? Do they have a minimum amount of physical activity? Do they have a normal body composition, and do they not smoke, right? Do you know the percentage of population that were able to have all those four goals?
Probably so low.
2.9%.
That's way lower than I thought it was. I was going to say like 6.
Yeah, 2.9% of that population sample size. Now, what was even more troublesome to me was the fact that 11% of the population didn't meet any of those criteria. Meaning the fact they didn't exercise well, they didn't have a balanced diet, they were smoking, and they had poor body composition. So almost 4 times as many people did none of those things, had none of those qualities, than did all of them.
We're gonna talk about that, but I just want to get to our sponsor real quick. So I want to thank F Squared Consulting for sponsoring the show. Yes, that's right. It's a brand new company that myself and a buddy of mine started to help get you guys on the track. We are talking great about wearables, being able to track what you're doing. So imagine doing that on a whole encompassing scale as an individual. So myself, I'm going to bring your health, your fitness, your motivation, and your goal setting to this consulting company to help make sure you're eating right, you're working out properly, you know what you're going for, to set goals that we're going to be tracking week by week. We do love our metrics. And then my buddy Keith is coming in to give you that finance side, something that is never added to the fitness side. We always pay for one or the other, so why not get both together? He's going to help you set up your stocks. He's going to help get you out of debt. He's going to help improve your income, know how to track your money. He's got thousands of people already following him on his YouTube channel, Think Stock. So definitely go check that out. But guys, we have now come together. So mention this podcast to get 10% off. Check us out. It's FitBodiesFatWallets.com. Again, it's FitBodiesFatWallets.com. F Squared Consulting. We hope to see you there. And I want to talk about what you mentioned, Greg, because God, I almost went on a rant yesterday about this, but I had to control myself. I do a bunch of networking groups, and it's just gets so disheartening watching, especially the people that I'm with, which it's for everybody, but they're all entrepreneurs, they're all small business owners, and they're trying to make money for themselves. They're working their butts off, right? But they don't take care of themselves. And it's hard to get the point across is you don't take care of yourself. It don't matter how much money you make, how successful you are, you're gonna either die young, or worse in my case is end up sick at a young age, have 20 years of illness, even though you're living to 80 because our medication's so great now. You can't enjoy the last 20 years of your life, and you're spending $5,000 to $15,000 a month on medication and going to the doctor just to stay alive. So, what kind of quality of life is that? The answer is there isn't. So, one of my guests said the saddest, funniest things I think I've heard. He wants to live life like a box. And I'm like, what the heck does that mean? It's like, instead of a bell curve where you kind of born and then you peak and then you go slowly down, I just wanted to go straight up and then straight down.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's great.
absolutely. No, completely. And like, and the big point of kind of obviously talking about these behaviors is it comes down to like really simplistic things. Some people think that we have to get into some of these nuances of like, supplementation or specific crazy exercises to do and things like that. It's just like, it can be as simple as just taking a couple seconds and having some couple breaths. Right? It could be something as simple as an intervention as that. We can get into the nuances of breathing patterns and getting more sympathetically dominant, like all these type of things. But I think it comes down to really a lot of fundamental aspects that we need to be able to start with. Don't need to overwhelm people with all these these fancy things from there, because and to me this is where it takes someone like yourself to look at the like health holistically from all different areas and be like, hey, well, what area are we deficient in, really? Like, do we have that drive and that purpose to go forward? I have a lot of people that are entering retirement age or are early retired, and they feel that everything's fine, but it's just like, you start to see that some of the metrics are slipping. You start to see that they're kind of like not as motivated, and it's kind of like slowly happening. It's just like, well, what's the next 30, 40 years going to look like for you? And I don't know, like they don't know what's going on. They're kind of just going by with various things. And even that's a gigantic impact into individuals, and be able to kind of define their purpose and work towards a goal, whatever necessarily it may be. Even something as simple as that like I had a client that was a big thing, chronic pain, individual, rheumatoid arthritis, that recently retired, very successful individual, started journaling and writing things down and starting that type of stuff. His sleep quality subjectively improved exponentially. He was getting up 2 to 3 times a night. He was then sleeping through the night, right? So you deal with one area of your health, right? Whether it can be purpose or fitness or nutrition, and how that can impact other areas of your health and well-being. It's unbelievable that how our body is so interconnected that way. And that comes back to the beginning of like REM sleep. It's like, how do we improve REM sleep? It's like, we've many different ways to be able to do it, but like, let's figure out, like, from a holistic perspective, big kind of 30,000 foot view, and look at you as an individual as a whole, and then how do we address those things, which then in turn will be able to improve that REM sleep. Not specifically REM sleep, not one supplement to be able to do that, but what are those bigger, higher level type of stuff that are typically more fundamental that we need to be able to address.
And that just flashed over my mind over this weekend. There needs to be change in how people think and how people talk and how people learn. And it's a bunch of just fake news. And what I mean by this is, I can't tell you, I will have a conversation with somebody about little steps, like you said, about getting healthy. And the biggest one to me is always sleep. And they come back 3 days later and they go, I started a no carb diet. And it's just like, did you listen to a word I said? And then
Yeah.
the next person, I ate healthier, started a no carb diet. Like, that's the new fad, is I started a no carb diet. There's no scientific evidence that works. And it's just like they hear that in the news. they hear it from a friend, and everyone jumps into, I'm eating healthy or I'm eating a no carb diet. And you just gotta be like, well, you need carbs to live. So I don't know what to tell you there. You need them. And they tell me, they go, or they come to me and they go, how many carbs do you eat a day? I was like,
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
What's a lot? Most of my food.
Yeah.
Well, what do you have in the morning? I'm like, 5 servings of oatmeal. And they look at me and they go,
Yeah.
that's carb, Anthony. I'm like, I know. So like, that's my point. Like, people don't understand anything about nutrition. And we hop onto this idea that a friend lost 10 pounds doing this XYZ thing. So that's going to work for everybody. And that's what everybody should be following. Not, hey, they lost that 10 pounds, so they did it unhealthy. Now they have a bunch of other medical issues you have to track and look for. And you're just going into that because a friend did and ignoring the people like ourselves who literally do this for a living.
Yeah.
It's just,
Well,
it's
even like the
disheartening.
fitness industry, it's like the influencers out there, like, oh, do these things for 6-pack abs, or like if you have back pain, do these stretches. It's like, it's not that simple. It's not that simple.
That's the Italian thing. It's the biting the fist
Yeah.
because you're so frustrated.
Yeah.
But it's so true. And just food for thought. One of the most famous Instagrammers who was talking about how to build her butt bigger ended up in the hospital for doing too many
Yeah.
steroids in her butt. But that's my point. What you see isn't what you get. So understand what you're looking at, who you're following, who you're watching. And this ties into the biggest point is you said 11% of people don't follow any of them. And why that's not as shocking as for me is our obesity population is above 50%. Not overweight, obese.
Yeah.
That's the higher end for those listening. So that's serious. And then we talk about a bunch of other things is, well, I'm obese. So now you're going to have a bunch of medical issues. So your bills are going to go up. You want to talk about inflation? Everyone's on inflation. What about when your hospital bills are $5,000 to $15,000 a month because you're overweight and never took care of yourself? That's one huge one. Want to talk about prices going up? What about the cost of obesity? It costs our country over $1 billion a year because we're overweight.
Yeah.
$1 billion a year. You want to save money? Let's all get healthy.
Yeah.
Let's bring down health insurance by all getting healthy. And then health insurance has no way but to go down because now we're going to the hospital way less.
Yeah.
Just going on rants. But you can see how passionate I am about this and why you just kind of, we need to go and move in the right direction. And it really starts with what you're saying is tracking or looking for little things you could do, like taking a deep breath, like I need to do right now. So, and being measurable, certain things. I'm going to just kind of jump back to what we talked about a little previously. Tracking your activity is great to an extent. Don't overdo it. Track very little. Hey, I worked out 3 days this week. That's kind of what I'm talking about. I did 20 minutes. Tracking your sleep, I kind of figured those wearables were really inaccurate because I've done sleep studies and the amount of equipment you get hooked up to is out of this world. And they still have issues tracking it. So I couldn't imagine a ring doing it. And then the third one, the biometrics, I think is probably the most important one to track. And especially what you talked about with no understanding your heart rate, because it tells you a lot more than you think it does. Like, for example, I was at a doctor's office who shall remain nameless, but I went there and they checked my heart rate and it was 98 beats per minute resting. And I went, wow, I think I'm sick. And they go, nah, it's normal. I was like, no, I think I'm sick. And they're like, no, it's in the normal range. I was like, for an average individual, my resting heart rate's like 58 beats per minute. 3 hours later, it's to say I had the chills and a high fever. But that's kind of my point. Understanding your heart rate, it can tell you a lot. Also, there's been a lot of studies, which I want you to talk about a little bit, with people who have been wearing watches, and it shows that they're having a heart attack or shows that they're having a stroke or they're in AFib. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that technology is now, the FDA are approving various devices for looking at these abnormal heart rhythms, right? So it won't necessarily detect heart attacks or strokes and things like that, but it looks at an alteration of your heart rhythm. Yeah, so they can do spot checks. So these wearable technologies now that they start to see there's some abnormal um, heart rate based upon that, it can do an ECG from it, right? So you can get an ECG done and start to look at that stuff. So I know Apple has an FDA approval and there's other FDA approvals out there from there, but the one that it's right now that's been accepted is AFib is the big one, or atrial fibrillation. That's coming in, but there's more and more that's coming out as all these technology advances can get into these wearables and smaller and better and better. You're going to start to see these things again. It's I think the benefit truly is going to be less on more of the diagnosis of things. I think that's going to be those type of wearables are going to be extremely expensive still for a very long period of time. But I think obviously looking at some sort of stuff that can kind of produce red flags that can get you in touch, right? You say, hey, you need to call a doctor right now to figure out what's necessarily going on, determine what's a medical emergency versus what just is, you may be sitting down reading, but having your feet on a bike and doing something, right? So determine those type of things. It makes it a little more difficult to determine those aspects, but the advances in regards to alerting when there could be major problems is coming swift and fast with a lot of these companies now, because the technology is becoming better and better. It's not great yet. It has its limitations for sure. The way that we have, there may be a new one that comes out or a new type of way to measure various biometrics in different ways. But yeah, you talk about when the FDA approved Apple Watch from an AFib perspective, it's like people are like, oh, like these wearables can do more than we can think.
Yeah, is there a different type of accuracy, do you know, as opposed to ones on the wrist or on the finger? Do you have any information on that? Like which ones you should wear and which ones you should avoid?
Yeah, it really depends on the company right now, because the technology is still relatively new from that. For what I've seen, I mean, the one ring wearable that's out there is the Oura Ring, which seems to have pretty good amount of data in regards to its efficacy around certain metrics comparatively to others. Wrist one, it's funny because it really varies on how you wear it, right? Because if even there's a little space in between of what's going on, if it's a little bit loose, comparatively tight, and that type of stuff, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. Where the ring could relatively be pretty darn snug, and your capillaries and vessels are relatively closer to that than the top of your wrist. But granted, even mentioning that, like I said, you are getting better to the point where Apple Watches, which are wrist-based wearable products, are coming at with some pretty impressive data, as well as some pretty interesting associations between various health conditions. So is it rose for preference? It's almost like it seems like 1 month it's this one and the other month it's that one, and it kind of comes back and forth because it's like everyone's getting up there, new companies are coming in with this type of stuff, and so it's really like the wild west into that. And who knows, even by the time this comes out, there may be some sort of other wearable that I don't know of that seems to be better, that it's on your fingertip versus your I don't know, right? So but as of right now, it really depends on more the company than actually kind of the placement of the wearable.
Love it. So we got a couple good recommendations there. Greg, I'm going to ask you the final two questions I ask everybody. And the first one, if you were to summarize this episode in 1 or 2 sentences, what would be your take-home message?
Yeah, I think the impact of the basics around health and well-being. We need to look at health holistically. I always say of looking at the biological, psychological, and social factors. Look at the biopsychosocial model. All those things come into play, and tracking metrics is a good feedback mechanism. But the main thing about wearables is bringing an awareness around where you're at as of right now, and then where you want to be able to go and understand what what the differences are between those two things. To kind of help, not again, to diagnose or to dissect what's going on, but to support and provide accountability to achieve your goals.
Love it. And then the second question is, how can people find you, get a hold of you, all
Yeah.
that stuff?
So I have my own personal website, gregelliot.ca. You can look at that. Just started that up after many people have suggested I do something like this. So I have up there, we're adding some resources slowly, information, all the other kind of podcasts. I put them up there, and ebooks and all that, blog posts, as well as I have a startup company called HealthQB. That's yourhealthqb.com. What we do is we take the information from wearable products, And we provide some context. We ask some assessments around what's going on. And we kind of prioritize some health behaviors for you to be able to address. And so we're pairing with all the wearables. We paired with Oura Ring, another company called BioStrap, which is great. We're integrating with Fitbits really soon, and we'll have Garmin in. So we're one by one taking all these wearables and integrating into the app. And we're also building out an online community too, a free resource for individuals that want to kind of, have a one-stop shop to get some resources around some of the experts out there to get some information holistically. How can you impact your health and well-being from a much broader perspective?
Definitely go check that out. Greg, thank you so much for coming on. And thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever changing field. And don't forget, fitness is medicine. Until next time. For us, we know what it's like to feel unhealthy, depressed, and downright defeated. We want to show others there is a right way. And through fitness, you can do anything you set your mind to. Fitness can give you that motivation, confidence, energy you need to bridge that mental gap and prevent you from missing important life events. We understand it's about feeling better, living longer, and being good examples for our kids. We understand this because we live it. And for us, that's the redefined difference.